You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician.
I'm not,
you read
I'm
the
not
polls.
a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah, you
I
are
sit
a
in Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
You are very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people
I'm
who
getting-
looked like you
Hold on, I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply
Actually-
can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
People are travelling again, heading back out on the road and rediscovering their wanderlust.
Exploring new destinations and cultures, making fresh friends, and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
That's why at the Travel Show, we're expanding our horizons too. And wherever we go,
we want you to come with us. Now, that might make for an awful lot of excess baggage, but we think you're worth it.
The Travel Show. Watch now on BBC iPlayer.
Wall Street brushes off inflationary fears after a global oil cartel announces surprise production cuts. Plus, we check out an app in India designed in part to help those in remote areas access welfare schemes. Hello and welcome to Asia Business Report. I'm Karishma Vaswani. Our top story for you today, Wall Street closing broadly up overnight despite that surprise move by the oil cartel OPEC Plus to cut oil output, stoking fears of more inflation to come. I want to show you how markets fared overnight in the United States. You can see there on our screens both the Dow and the S&P 500 closing a little higher, in part thanks to the energy sector index, which surged after OPEC Plus's announcement. Now, production will be cut by 1% globally next month. My colleague Samira Hussein has more.
Now, many analysts believe that the coalition of oil-producing nations really want to keep the price of oil above $80 a barrel, even hovering around $90 a barrel. Now, a higher price of oil has wide-ranging implications. It will make producing goods more expensive for companies. And if prices stay high for a while, it will have an impact on the price of gasoline. And as many countries around the world are fighting high inflation, this move by OPEC could make that battle more difficult. Now, the White House has been pushing OPEC to increase production, even making a special trip to Saudi Arabia last year to make a personal plea. Now, unsurprisingly, Washington did not take the news of a production cut well, with the head of the National Security Council calling it inadvisable. U.S. President Joe Biden has been pushing for lower gas prices to ease the cost of living burden on American pocketbooks.
Samira Hussein reporting on that story for us. Well, I want to turn to Australia for you now, because later today, the central bank there will make its latest decision on the cost of borrowing. Now, the Reserve Bank of Australia has indeed hiked rates 9 times in a row so far in a bid to stem sky-high inflation in the country. But recent data appears to suggest those rising prices may be slowing, and not just in Australia, in fact. Earlier, I spoke with Dweivor Evans from State Street Global Markets, and he told me what he expected from the RBA today.
Well, we think they're going to stay on hold. And clearly, inflation is still a problem in Australia. But the way that we're looking at it right now is that inflation is coming down. We have proprietary indicators of G10 inflation pressures, and Australia is seeing the weakest, among the weakest of the G10 inflation pressures. So they've certainly got an opportunity here to stay on hold. We have to think about it in the broader context as well. Growth is slowing in Australia quite quickly. Business confidence has weakened quite markedly in the last few months. And maybe most importantly of all, the RBA is very, very sensitive to this. There is a direct knock-on effect to mortgages in Australia in terms of an adjustment in mortgage rates later on this year. Another rate hike, all that simply does is it squeezes consumers and households even further. So given the slowdown in inflation that we're seeing, the RBA certainly has scope today just to stay on hold and wait and see again.
Yeah, Dweivor, excellent points there, particularly about that tricky balance, right, between trying to combat inflation, but also trying to maintain or ensure that growth remains stable. It's not just Australia that's in that difficult position, is it? I mean, other countries in this part of the world also facing that issue.
Most countries are facing that issue, to be honest with you, because we're also now in the middle of what is, and obviously there's quite a wide debate around this in terms of how deep the recession or how deep the slowdown will be throughout various parts of the world. So you are tightening. I mean, the saying is you're tightening into a recession or you're tightening into a slowdown. So in other words, as a central bank, what you have to avoid, or you have to try and avoid at least, is accelerating the process of a slowdown that we're seeing, and ensuring that you're not over tightening. Now, of course, this is tricky because central banks invariably have a mandate which is inflation as opposed to growth. But when we look at the rest of the region, we look at, for example, some of the emerging markets within Asia. Korea is one that stands out, for example, because there's a slowdown in terms of global growth. That means there's a slowdown in terms of the export sector in Korea, a vital part of the Korean economy. And of course, can the central bank tighten further and effectively engineer a slowdown?
That was Duivo Evans there from State Street Global speaking to me a little earlier, not just about the economy in Australia, but of course the broader outlook for the global economy, given that tricky balance that we're seeing now between inflation and interest rates. But I want to tell you about other news this morning, because a federal jury in the United States state of San Francisco has ordered EV manufacturer Tesla to pay $3.2 million to a former employee. Now, this was after it was found to have failed to prevent severe racial harassment at its flagship assembly plant in California. Well, French President Emmanuel Macron and the President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will leave for China later today. They're expected to arrive in Beijing on Wednesday and are due to meet with President Xi Jinping and other top Chinese officials. Our business reporter today is Joao da Silva. He's been following the story closely for us, joins me now. Great to get you on the show as always, Joao. This visit, what are we expecting from it?
Well, Karishma, it seems like European leaders just can't get enough of China right now. Just last week, we saw Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez there, and now Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen on their way to China. The obvious reason why they're going is, of course, trade. Two-way trade in 2021 reached more than $860 billion. China is, of course, Europe's second largest trade and investment partner. And that's why Emmanuel Macron is traveling with a huge delegation of dozens of top company executives. But what makes trade so important right now is really timing. Europe is emerging from a painful breakup with Russia and just can't afford to lose another important trading partner. Whereas for China, Europe is only growing in importance at a time when relations with the United States are souring. So both sides really need each other right now. But for Europe, this is about way more than trade. European leaders understand the outsized influence that China has over Russia right now, and they want to make sure that China doesn't use that influence to support Russia's war efforts in Ukraine. But there is a certain ambivalence in Europe's position vis-a-vis China, and von der Leyen signaled precisely that last week when she said that given China's hardening policies, Europe needs not to decouple from China, but to de-risk politically and economically. So we'll have to wait and see what that means in terms of trade going forward.
Joao da Silva, thanks for that update on that story. I know you'll be watching that visit closely for us right here on BBC News. Well, let's take you to India now, because of course it's home to over 1.4 billion people. So, as you can imagine, the challenges of running government welfare programs there can be immense. But one startup is hoping that its app can address this. My colleague Nikhil Namdar checks it out.
Consider this. The Indian government spends about 7% of its GDP on welfare and benefits. There are about 13,000 odd schemes that 900 million Indians can avail of. Everything from scholarships to pensions to healthcare. But very often the problem is people simply do not have the information about what they're eligible for.
So this is the Hakdarshak.
Hakdarshak, a startup co-founded by Aniket Dogar, is using technology to connect beneficiaries with government welfare programs. So how does it work?
You essentially start by registering the citizen on the platform by asking basic demographic details and their name, phone number, gender, where they live. These set of 40 to 50 questions ultimately lead to an icon saying what are your eligible government schemes. And these are the documents, identity documents required to get these schemes.
Gangubai Vasavla is one of the 3 million people across some 7,000 villages who've claimed their benefits using Haq Darshak. The company helped her get a grant for 20 mango saplings under the government's fruit tree plantation scheme for farmers.
I got $25 to buy the plants and now get government help to keep them alive. When they're ready, it will help me supplement my family's income.
Now, while the Haq Darshak app might look easy to use for people like you and me, most of its beneficiaries are neither literate nor are they tech savvy. And that's where the company's army of ground agents comes into the picture.
Every day, Manisha, a Haq Darshak field agent, screens people for scheme eligibility, uploads their documents on the app and submits them to the relevant government department for processing.
In this village, barely 100 people had a pension. But since I began doing this, I've helped 5,000 of the 15,000 villagers claim it. I feel very proud.
But Haq Darshak charges a minimum fee for its services, barely enough to cover costs. Can they ever make money from this?
We are creating that base for financial institutions, financial service organizations, where they can build on top of it and offer products. So there we see in the next 4 to 5 years, we really being able to, let's say, monetize and get profitable.
Aniket's aim in the next few years is to help 100 million Indians claim what's rightfully theirs. It's a lofty goal, especially since funding for startups has dried up and getting corporates to pay for welfare is getting tougher in a slowing economy. Nikhil Ananda, BBC News in Palghar, India.
Fascinating stuff there. And that brings us to the end of Asia Business Report at this hour. Thanks for joining me. Do stay with BBC News.
The latest way to improve safety for people out partying in Bath. The Safe Bus will be parked up every Friday and Saturday night outside Bath Abbey.
At the end of the bus we have this sort of private area and this is obviously for people to come if they need their own private space, need some private medical treatment.
And then we've got kitchen.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the kitchen area. We've got everything that you would probably need if you wanted to keep warm and have a nice drink, tea, coffee facilities, water. Underneath here we've got sick bowls, emergency blankets, flip-flops, which I've been told by the night pastors are really popular, spare clothing, phone chargers. There will always be a paramedic, there will be a security marshal in the city with our night marshals, and then it will be a team of volunteers. It will be people who need first aid and who will need the paramedic and that support.
Pressure on emergency services is known to be higher at weekends.
If you can deal with the situation like on the ground where it's happened, then people don't have to take themselves up to A&E.
The idea's already been proven elsewhere, and venues throughout Bath had asked for their own bus. Vulnerable, tipsy, or maybe even lost, this bus is one that will always have a seat for you.
Hey, I'm Rachel with the catch-up. First, to Liverpool, where Olivia Pratt-Corbell's killer has been jailed for 42 years. 9-year-old Olivia was shot by Thomas Cashman as he chased another drug dealer into her home last August. He refused to appear in court for the sentencing. Olivia's mum, Cheryl, spoke afterwards.
We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia.
Some other news. Russian investigators are holding a woman as a suspect after a bombing killed a pro-war blogger in a cafe in St. Petersburg. In a video released by Russian authorities, Daria Trepova is heard admitting she handed over a statue that later blew up. Is your passport up to date? You might want to have a check. Passport office workers across the UK have started a 5-week strike over pay, and the demand for new passports has gone up. The union is warning there may be delays in the lead up to summer. White shorts on your period doesn't sound ideal, does it? That's what England's Lionesses had to play football in during the Euros. But for the Women's World Cup this summer, there'll be a change, and pictures of the new blue shorts have been released after players called for a different colour. To finish off, let's have a look at 10 seconds of a hero. This is the moment that a skier spots and saves a snowboarder who was stuck upside down under a tree in America, and the whole thing was caught on camera too. Incredible. You're all caught up now? Have a good night.
Today we're looking at the state of British politics.
Asking, is technology ruining football?
Are we too obsessed with our phones?
Helen from Hull wants to know, how hot's the planet going to get?
And we'll explain why prices keep going up and up.
Also, Rach, did you know space has its own smell?
Really? What of? The world is fast-moving and can be confusing.
So let's talk about it.
5 Live Breakfast with Rachel and Rick. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Hello, I'm Tolson Tollett, live from the BBC Sports Centre. Coming up on this programme, Everton strike late to grab a point against Tottenham and move out of the relegation zone. Chelsea's search for a new manager will have a lot of top candidates, but the time frame is unknown. And golf's big names play down talk that it's Live versus PGA Tour players at this week's Masters in Augusta. Hello there, I'm Tolson Tollett and this is your sports news, where we start with football. Everton and Tottenham Hotspur shared the goals and the red cards at Goodison Park. After a lacklustre first half, Abdoulaye Doucouré